Matei is the owner of Backyard Bounty, a garden company that helps clients build gardens of abundance, reclaiming their yards for themselves and for nature. An acknowledged expert in native plants, stormwater management, and organic landscape design, Ida Marie has created hundreds of gardens in the DC area that promote native species, provide wildlife habitat, and each year prevent over 5 million gallons of stormwater from running into our creeks, rivers, and bay. Ida Marie started gardening when her children were young as a way to introduce them to nature and find a source for organic food. Prior to Backyard Bounty, she was an English teacher in Montgomery County, the San Francisco Bay Area, and the South Bronx. A proud native of New Jersey, Ida Marie has degrees from Georgetown and Penn. Her hobbies include hiking, cooking, and gardening, of course. Ida Marie will be speaking about embracing nature in your garden, and I want to welcome her today.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I am a lapsed master gardener. That was one of the first things I did when I switched careers, was to become a master gardener. And my work kind of took all my volunteer time, but I'm always so appreciative of the work that you do, outreaching, answering questions, helping people develop a love of gardening. So we're going to talk today about embracing nature in your garden and how we do that, and what it means to embrace nature in your garden, and what we think the new American garden should do and be. So, as my bio mentioned, I am a proud native of New Jersey, but my father's family was all in Cincinnati, Ohio. And so every summer we would get in the family station wagon and drive to Cincinnati to visit family. And every time we stopped for gas, we'd clean the windshields because they'd be covered with bugs. How many of you remember doing that? Probably a lot. I'll ask you to pause for a second and think about the last time you were on a road trip and you absolutely had to wash off or clear off your windshield. For me, it's been a long time. I don't remember needing to really, like driving on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, driving up to New Jersey, needing to wash my windshield from having run into a zillion bugs. I just don't remember needing to do that anytime recently. Why? Because we are in a world where insects are declining at an alarming rate. And this is here, we've got a picture of one of our major environmentalists and scientists, E.O. Wilson, and he talks about angiosperms and how important pollinating insects are to what we need for survival. So this loss of insects is really a frightening thing for all of us. 90% of angiosperms that we require for living are pollinated by insects. Globally, we are looking at an insect apocalypse, and you might have read about this in the news. So insect decline is at 45%. Germans are researching this. Europeans are researching this more than Americans. And excuse me, I thought I had my phone on mute. It should be on and they are noting 79% decrease in insect populations since the 1989. 3/4 of British butterflies in decline. 50% of Midwestern bees are gone, and 1.5 billion fewer birds than we had 40 years ago. So really significant loss. And given that, we feel it's really important that this is not an understatement to say that we garden as if our lives depended upon our gardens, because they do. So all of us who have land, we believe have the responsibility of gardening, managing that land to help address the insect apocalypse and some of the other environmental struggles that we are facing. So here's my New Jersey home in the 1970s, lawn, some Japanese holly, some daylilies, a very, very typical New Jersey suburban home. Very, very little in this landscape was good for any kind of habitat. You know, in the 70s, when I grew up, my father was the first person in his family to graduate from high school, let alone college and graduate school, which he already did. So success for him was to have a house with a big lawn, looking like, you know, here we are, we're landed gentry in England. And that's what I grew up with. And it wasn't until I got older and started gardening that I realized, well, that's not really doing that much good. So how can we take this model of sort of your English estate and turn it around so that it is good for the environment and good for us? And here's a picture of a client in Great Falls where instead of that big front lawn, we built habitat with junipers and inkberry and sisyrinchium and a whole bunch of other really, really good things. So you can have you know, sort of a big estate house and make it habitat, but you can do that in small yards too. So what do we want to see in the new American garden? We want our gardens to grow habitat with flowers for pollinator, food for birds, and food for people. We want our gardens to heal. So by slowing down stormwater, by saving insects and keeping toxins out of our soils and out of our streams. And we really, really also don't want to underestimate the value of gardens that connect people to nature, because we are nature, but we've kind of forgotten that sometimes because we live in our in front of our screens and in our houses. So we want people to be back connected to nature and also to each other, and to really get the restoration and the healing that you get from being in nature. So for growing, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the work of Doug Ptolemy, and I'll just highlight that the magic number is if we have 70 to 75% native plants in our gardens, we are going to be able to support chickadees. And we find that number is important because this is a change. You know, I think it's, we can get really excited about the fact that we should have 100% natives in our gardens. But the truth is, when you're first reaching out and asking people to change, we don't want to scare them away. We want them to say, okay, yes, you can have your peony. It's not invasive. It's not going to travel. So yes, but please, let's add these other plants too. And when we start, we really encourage people to think about some of the powerhouses of our native, in our native, I want to say arsenal, and asters and goldenrods for perennials are some of the top plants for pollinators. We also want to encourage people to grow food for birds. And I think a lot of times we think of that as berries, and this winterberry is an example. But of course, what we don't necessarily always know is how important caterpillars are for birds. So we love to encourage folks to grow trees that will support caterpillars, like oaks. And of course, oaks support a massive number of caterpillars, and our native viburnums, which are also fabulous for wildlife. Not only, they also have berries and flowers, kind of a little bit of everything. And then we are growing also habitat, places for wildlife to hide, places for foraging. And, there's a lot of what we do traditionally, or what we have done traditionally in gardens, that is actually harming the development of and the livelihood of our native bees and other insects. When we cut down our grasses completely in the fall, then suddenly there's no place for cavity nesting insect to live. So we really want to encourage people to leave their leaves, leave their grasses up through the winter for all of these creatures. And then these, whoops, I went backwards. Sorry about that. And then these are also really beautiful in the landscape. Your sunlight running through the grasses in the evening, even when they're tan. We encourage people to grow food, fewer plastic clamshells from the grocery store for lettuce. Lettuce is one of the easiest things to grow. And when I was a master gardener, that we were doing a lot of talk about salad tables. So we built a salad table out of heat treated pallets so that we didn't worry about chemicals. And the more you can grow, the less, not only is there a lower carbon footprint from driving to a grocery store, but I think even more importantly and more significantly is the amount of plastic that our food comes in that we can reduce. We also want people to use alternatives to pesticides. This is a field in Vermont on Lake Champlain, and it's on the edge of the lake. It's a sort of a marshy area, and the owner put up all of these boxes for sparrows, who are rabid mosquito eaters, and being creative is certainly one thing to do. You can also use fans, and there are a variety of other things besides the Mosquito Joe approach for pesticides. The other thing that we really worry a lot about and spend a lot of time thinking about is keeping our rivers clean. So the Potomac River, it provides 90% of our drinking water. And we are in a watershed to this river. So these fertilizers and pesticides and also pollutants that come off of our driveways and our roofs are going into the Potomac. So figuring out how to reduce the runoff and keep those waterways clean is something that we want everyone to be thinking about, and we know that we can make an impact in our own gardens. Suburban homes are about 10% of the source of pollutants that run into the Chesapeake Bay. And you might have seen this chart before, but it's an interesting one to show you what's the difference in runoff from different environments. So once upon a time, when we were living in a world of woods, only 10% of the water that fell on the ground ran off. But in our cities, you can see we now have about 55% of stormwater that runs into our streams. And as we continue to grow, that becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And in a lot of countries, regulations require people to keep the runoff from their homes on their property and have it infiltrate. We are, I think we're really lucky in Montgomery County. We do have a rainscapes program that it has done an amazing job both helping people convert their properties and also educating people about this important thing. And we also have improved regulation about stormwater management. So how do you look specifically for stormwater issues in your own garden? You can start with a map. The blue lines on this map show the way that the water is falling. So you look at, where is that water going in my garden? And which way does it flow? And then once you see the way that it flows, what can you do to stop that flow? So this property is on a cul-de-sac drive. There's a road here, driveway here, and water coming down. And so these clients removed the turf that was abutting these impermeable surfaces, and turned it into a rain garden and conservation landscape. They eventually did it down here too. But phase one, and with some pictures that I'll show you, was that upper area. So here's another example of turf. This is in the town of Somerset. And this is a well-traveled driveway that leads to the tennis courts, and the town hall is over to the left. And there's a storm drain right here, and the residents of the town who were on the environmental committee realized, well, hey, this is a lot of water that we could help slow down. And so what we did was created a little conservation landscape on a slope. And what you can't see once a garden is fully planted is that along the line where these grasses are little microberms that, let me go backwards for a second. Oops, and that here they are, that are slowing down the water when it hits, so that it has a chance to percolate back into the ground. I'm going to go backwards to that other slide. So why remove turf? Here is the average profile of the roots of turf grass. Here is the root of a coneflower. Here are the roots of other grasses and natives. So you can see how much deeper these roots go down into the ground. And why is that important? Well, what those roots do, as we know, is, plants grow in the air pockets between soil, right? The roots grow in there. Those air pockets, that root mass helps keep soil from getting compacted and keeps it friable, keeps it so that plants, so that water doesn't just run off it as quickly as it would across turf or again across a hardscape. So here is a picture of that grass site as we're working on the garden, the microberms going in, compost being added. And then here's the plant material filling in. And again, much more interesting, much more beautiful. And so this garden that is managing the stormwater is also providing habitat and pollination for insects. So that's a conservation landscape. And so those are landscapes where we're putting in native plants that have deep roots to help improve friability in soil and help improve runoff. Sometimes when you've got a relatively flat site without trees and you still have a lot of runoff, you have the opportunity to put in a rain garden. And a rain garden is where you can temporarily pond that water and let it seep back into the ground, and you can take more water in and slow more water down. It is a fabulous stormwater management tool. It is one that I think lots and lots of people get excited about. And unfortunately, in many cases, isn't possible when, for example, you live in a woodland. We don't want to kill an oak by excavating for a rain garden. So rain garden is a garden in which you've excavated the soil and early on replaced the soil with an engineered mix that was primarily sand. Another way that Rainscapes was a pioneer was to investigate doing deep decompaction, so keeping the native soils, but just amending them with a lot of compost and deep decompacting them to create this sponge that water could then seep in. And you start with a percolation test because a rain garden that can't go in anywhere where soil won't drain within 24 hours. We don't want a swamp. We don't want to create a mosquito problem or anything else. So you dig a hole about 1 foot in diameter and 2 feet down. You fill it with water. You let the water drain. You fill it again, and then you watch. And if it drains in 24 hours, then your soil is appropriate for a rain garden. And this is the deep decompaction method. So this auger goes down 3 feet, and we drill holes next to each other and break that area down and then fluff it all up with lots and lots of compost. And then, because we all know that our storms are getting bigger and bigger, we want to make sure that our rain gardens can be prepared for those storms where you get 3 inches in half an hour. And so this stone area right here is what's called the overflow. So when the water comes, it sits, and when it reaches this berm level here, this cutout, it will flow into the conservation landscape. And that's so that the water so here's a picture of that landscape that I just showed you planted, and actually only 1 season old. And so you can see how these native plants fill in, especially our perennials, really, really quickly, and our grasses, and start doing their work almost immediately. You know, it certainly takes several years for a garden to become established, but it's striking to all of us how quickly some of the perennials and grasses get going really, really early on. And then this is that same garden, and you can see the changes. This is that garden in the fall. You can see the penstemon over here is still interesting. It's lost its flower, but its leaves are still present. This is one of my favorite native ground layer plants, Aster ericoides. And the black-eyed Susan's still going, and here we are late fall, and there's still lots and lots of activity or lots and lots of flowers. And then, you know, I spoke a little bit earlier of how important it is to leave grasses and seed heads. And here's a picture of that same garden in the winter, in the snow. And rather than a plain landscape of turf, you've got all of these shades of tan and brown and green to contrast with the snow. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful. We just we have to remind people that, you know, a sort of totally empty landscape is really more boring. And here we have a garden in the fall and the beautiful colors that you get in the fall. And, you know, one of my favorite oak leaf hydrangeas that give you great joy in so many seasons. So we'd love to see people outside enjoying gardens. I also included some pictures for you of a few recent garden transformations that we've installed that we were excited about. This first garden is a property in Northwest DC, and the client contacted us. She had just put in a new porch and an addition in the back, and decided, okay, now I really want to have a garden around my house. And she didn't know anything about native plants. She was happy with this big patch of liriope because she didn't have too much weed pressure, but she didn't, and she didn't really know what else she wanted. And she liked sort of a bit of a traditional landscape, and she wanted things to look like they would blend into her neighborhood. So we listened to all of those requests and noted, the areas where there was bare ground and runoff, and replaced her garden with a garden of natives that still fit in very nicely with this traditional house and in this traditional neighborhood. So, we have coral bell. This is a Carex appalachica lawn. She wanted a little bit of turf remaining in the front, so we left a little circle here. But we like to size turf for what people need, not for everything. So not your whole yard. And you can see the difference in the yard with all of this pretty plants. So this is all newly planted, and we owe her a trip this year to be able to get more pictures when things have really filled in. You can see the Tiarella blooming, the Carex, and then here's the backyard. Again, really bare and nothing happening, and really no place to gather outside of it being in the sunroom. So we put in a patio and then planted around that patio for wildlife, and also put in a little bubbler for water and for peace. The side path was before pretty bare, and we planted natives along the side path. We've got sweet bay magnolias and Carex. These are the remains of our client's daffodils, chrysogonum. All of these shade tolerant, tight space plants. Another garden that we wanted to show you, this one is in the town of Chevy Chase. Again, pachysandra and turf and, beautiful trees that we wanted to preserve and let shine. And adding habitat to this garden, we removed the turf. Here we removed it entirely, removed the pachysandra, which has, that there's a beautiful native pachysandra. The non-native doesn't have any wildlife value, but and we put in sedges and flowering plants. We took this eroded section, added paths, stone paths for where people walk, because obviously you need to stabilize that so silt doesn't run away, and then filled the path in. And again, you're looking at plantings that are less than 6 months old, and you can see that they're starting to fill in very quickly. And if we go back this year, we'll be even more full. So from bare to full. And here we've got a picture of the stormwater path that we planted so that it would be able to convey water without mulch washing away. This was a heavy stormwater pressure area. And so the rock is in the middle because of the velocity of water that goes through the site. And the plantings are on the side and a little bit in this river rock itself to keep that soil friable. And our goal is for those plants to be able to fill in and almost hide the rock once their roots are really, really established. And got one more picture of a traditional landscape in Chevy Chase. And in this landscape, the client wanted to really keep a lot of non-native, so her hostas and her pachysandra. So we put those in by the street and then added ferns and native sedges and native hydrangeas close to the house, and are encouraging our client over the years, as these natives fill in, to replace the pachysandra along the street. And I think that's another thing that we think is really, really important, is to just make sure that when we're reaching out to people about changing their gardens, we show them how they can do it in phases over time. A lot of our native plants will be growing vigorously and can be divided and moved into a new section, so that piece by piece you can replace non-native or replace turf with plant material that's growing in your own yard. So we'd like to say we want to weave habitat and home together to be bountiful and beautiful. 85.6% of the land east of the Mississippi is privately owned. And you know, if we own that land, we feel strongly that we have that responsibility to manage that land so that it is able to support our children and our grandchildren and generations to come. And I'm going to end with a picture of Alice Waters, who was one of my inspirations in founding my company. So Alice Waters is the woman who began Chez Panisse in Berkeley. And when she began, she said, okay, we need to find organic food, and we need to make sure that we source it, and we look for the farmers who support the land. That's who we want to cook our food from. And when in 1994, there were 1,755 farmers markets in America. In 2014, 8,268. I'm sure that number's gone up. Alice Waters, I think, is a great example of, you know, choosing to do, you know, a very successful business, but choosing to manage it ethically had a big impact on teaching people about the value of organic management of land. And you know, as Margaret Mead said, you know, you never doubt that a small group of thoughtful and committed citizens can change the world. That is what has always changed the world. So we invite all of you to join us in our goal of helping people embrace nature in their backyards. And I've got a list of, and you'll get this PowerPoint, so you'll get this list of books and sources that you can read to further your learning on this area. I want to call out one additional book that I'm a big fan of. I don't know if you've read Rambunctious Gardens, Saving Nature in a Post-Wild World. This is a collection of essays by a science journalist, Emma Maris, and I strongly recommend this too, if you haven't had a chance to read it. And I'll stop share now and be available for questions.
Thank you very much, Ada Marie. We have a number of questions, so I'll put those together. The first that came up was, what is the definition of a conservation garden? And how would
Mm.
someone get a map that shows those lovely blue lines and all the water flow on your own property?
So we call a conservation landscape a landscape that replaces turf or invasives with native species that have deeper roots and that provide multiple benefits, not just the deep root stormwater management, but also habitat. So that garden is conserving water, it's conserving habitat. And that's how we would describe a conservation landscape. For Montgomery County Rainscapes program, that also means that you're deep decompacting the soil so that those plants have a good start in the soil to spread out and do their job. The map that you saw is a map that the Rainscapes program will generate. So if you are interested in doing a Rainscapes project at your house, you can get that map. You can get a topographic survey to see how how water runs on your property. Also, that would be something that would be at your own expense. And then you can get some decent maps of your property, just going to Google Earth and through the county and get some sort of some general topo lines, which may or may not have changed.
Okay, thank you. The question was this specifically about the microberms, the slide you showed us with the microberms? And are they composed of just mounds of soil, or are they amended in any way?
So the microberms are not amended. The microberms are soil that is compacted with a tamper. Because what we want is, we don't want that soil to slip away in a storm. And so we plant the plants on the edges of it, knowing that over time those plants are going to grow in, and that microberm might break apart a little bit as the plants mature and the plants start to be able to do their job. But it is tamped earth, and for any kind of grading, you always want a heavier soil that will actually really stay in place. You could use coir logs, which you might have heard of. That also helps to slow down runoff. And you could certainly use boulders. And another thing that I didn't talk about, but I love to do is snags. So we were also thinking, once upon a time we thought that the best way to care for your garden was to clean up all of the broken branches. Well, actually those are great sources of food for insects and then birds, and they also are great microberms if you get along enough logs that you can lay on a slope, particularly a slope in a woodland.
Okay. Then there was a question about cost per square foot to install and maintain a conservation garden.
The maintain, I don't know that I have a good, I don't know about the cost per square foot, but that's a good question, and I'll try to calculate that for you. So we estimate that installed, including plants, conservation landscape is probably about $15 a square foot if you're having a professional install it. And a maintenance is, the studies that I've seen are that maintenance long-term is always less expensive when you've got a planted landscape, not less expensive in the first year. In the first year, you're going to be spending more time weeding and watering while the plants get established. But then as your plants fill in, and we do planting with a really heavy ground layer so that we have what we call green mulch, so that instead of the needing to top with regular mulch every year, you've got sedges and tiarella and other plants filling in and shading out roots and holding the soil, and that reduces the cost of mulching and other maintenance and weeding and other issues around a garden. But I don't have a per dollar per square foot number for you.
Once a landscape's established, how many times a year would you say that gardening would need to happen if you were outsourcing this? So monthly,
So
weekly?
Yeah, I would say, what we aim for is a garden that gets pruning in late winter, and then a little bed prep in early spring, and then, a weeding visit or two over the course of the summer. And then in the fall, we actually try to get as many leaves as possible to go into garden beds and then top them with compost. And that's our fertilizer system. That's what nature does. So that is, call it four attended visits. Certainly lots of people can manage the weeding on their own as their gardens get more established. But not a sort of weekly, monthly, heavy duty amount of work. That you can do more. You can do, if you like to have a lot of asters and some of them get big, you can do you could be spending time doing Chelsea chop to cut them in early June so they don't get too tall. There are a lot of specialty things that you can do that aren't harmful, but you don't need to.
Mm-hmm. So somewhere in the 4 to 6 range, depending on the plants, the garden, and so forth.
Yeah, and the maturity of the garden.
Right. Big question on what is your source for native plants?
So I think that there are more and more Izell Plants has a nice collection of natives that homeowners can access. Nature by Design, unfortunately, in Alexandria isn't operating right now. We love them. We love a couple nurseries in New Jersey, some in the Pine Barrens that are actual nurseries. You may know that so much of our plant material is grown in the Midwest and shipped in trucks. And what might be helpful is for me to put a list of native plant nurseries in an email to share. I probably should add that into the PowerPoint. I don't, because there are a lot of them.
So I'm getting a question now about your contact information. So I don't know how to address this, but an email to us could then just get moved on to the whole listserv as a group.
Sure. Yeah, and my email. Well, you can always reach if you send an email to info@backyardbounty.net.
Okay.
I would see that too.
Okay. There are a couple questions. Okay. In the landscapes like those you showed us in Chevy Chase, have you tracked the increase in bird and insect life? Do you know of anyone besides Doug telling me that's done work in that?
No, and that is definitely something that we really want to do. We're actually trying to get an intern for this summer who can do that. That's a lot of work. But we would love to be able to track what happens in suburban landscapes. We're a little bit tapped out in our capacity to do that. But another thought, and I'd welcome your thoughts, sort of having citizen scientists if clients have the time to track what's happening in their own yards. We have anecdotal things, I often laugh about the fact that every single time I plant a trumpet honeysuckle in a client's garden, a hummingbird shows up in 2 days. And it's, there are things where you really just, you see more abundance than you did before, but we don't have that tracked.
Okay. Are you aware of any efforts to move away from plastic pots at local nurseries? And do any of the local nurseries actually reuse the plastic pots if they are returned to them?
So I don't know about local nurseries. The nurseries that we use have all told us that they will reuse our plastic pots. So we're very grateful for that. So we were able to save pots that we have gone to an installation. The nurseries can wash them and then reuse them. Plastic pots, the Association of Professional Landscape Designers is working on an initiative trying to encourage us to find alternatives to plastic pots. It's really something that we're all super concerned about. The amount of waste that we generate building these good gardens is way too much, and definitely something that we need to fix. So little things that we can do, we are as reuse, and that's what we're doing right now. And then the recycling problem is a serious one.
Okay, there are a couple notes in the chat of other places that pots can be donated or reused, so that would be great.
Yeah, great.
Numerous questions about how to handle invasives within native areas. So you've put your conservation garden in place, but you have stiltgrass invading the whole meadow.
Yeah.
What do you do to that if it's a half acre? Or what do you do about pachysandra? What do you do about Japanese honeysuckle or porcelain berry in a wooded area?
In a wooded area. I think it's the best thing to do is to have an inventory of what the invasives are before you start to plant, and to try to remove as much as possible prior to planting. And that might be done depending on what the plant is. You can pull stiltgrass before it's at seed without too much trouble. You can grind honeysuckle, and then smother it and monitor it, ideally for a couple of years. But that's, we don't always do that. And as soon as we start to plant with a little bit of removal, then we do end up with these problems. When you're in a situation like that, I really strongly recommend going the route of native bullies, because they can help. They can stand up to the non-native plants a little bit better. So your goldenrods and your Pachyra, your golden groundsel, those are really good plants that are able to be, that are tough competitors. In the world of sedges, Carex flacosperma is a great spreader. That's a good defense. We did a garden for the town of Chevy Chase in Zimmerman Park, and the border of the garden was just absolutely inundated by lesser celandine, and we planted Pachyra or golden groundsel along the border, and it smothered it. Pachyra can outcompete. We did remove what we could, but anybody who's tried to remove lesser celandine knows that that's a multi-year process. So the Pachyra was a great competitor, and I think that is an important tool that we need to kind of keep in mind and remember to use.
Okay. And I think the final question that I have is, can you speak at all to how you design with native plants? Are there any special ways that you kind of bring into it in terms of formality or informality, how you put them together, drifts, or in what areas, what ways?
Sure, I could speak about both the drift approach and also formality versus informality. Honestly, I love to do formal looking native gardens, because I still think we're fighting the battle of people thinking that if I'm planting native, I'm planting a meadow that is that my HOA may frown upon. So we'd like to do traditional landscaping looking native gardens for sure. And you can plant any style with native plants. You don't we can make a garden that is appropriate for your landscape, for your taste, with using native plant material. I find that using drifts of plants, massing plants, is a really helpful way for people to go native in their gardens. Number one, when you see a bunch of these plants are going to grow together, and so it's very easy to identify what is a weed and what is not, particularly for people who aren't gardeners. All of us in the room are gardeners. But a lot of people are so nervous after they put in a native landscape that they're going to pull the wrong plant. So those drifts are super helpful because they're just very obvious cues of, this is where one thing is, this is where the other thing is. We tend to use, I would say, 60 to 70% in a border, in an herbaceous border, probably 60 to 70% grasses and sedges. Also, both because that allows the flowers to really pop visually and give them a background and give them a foil, and also because that's a little bit, those are areas of less work for clients. And again, we want these landscapes to survive and last and not be frustrating. It's not just about going in once and putting in something that's really pretty. We really want, if we do that and then suddenly, it's this very complicated English border style garden that nobody wants to maintain, then I think we failed. So drifts and a fair amount of sort of background native plants are really, really helpful. And we use a lot of sedges, but there are some really great ground cover basil leaf natives that can do similar jobs for people who want a lot more flowers, like erigeron and pachyra and tiarella, all of which are deer resistant. Salvia loretta, also a great native ground cover filler.
Great. Okay, I think that's all the questions I have. Thank you again. This has been very, very helpful. And I guess we'll turn it back over to Steve.
Yeah, great.
right.
Thanks. Hey, let's see. Just gonna kind of wrap things up here real quickly, everyone. I want to thank our tech team members today, Tina Burke and Sue DeGrava. Of course, I want to thank our speaker, Ida Marie, for her presentation today. Thank you, Ida Marie. And to close things up here today. Again, thank you, Ida Marie, and hope to see some of you guys soon.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.